So, I feel deeply humbled for this prize on behalf of the CML patient community, for Giora and myself. I feel myself not as the award recipient, but more as a representative of the community, because as you could see in all the different photos that Andreas has shared, that we have become a global community that really tries to work very closely with researchers. But first of all, thank you so much to the iCMLf board of directors and to everyone involved for giving us the opportunity to work with all of you. It's been great 21 years in really working with researchers and trying to do our bit in advancing CML research and CML care. What I'm going to speak about in a couple of moments is about the past 20 years, how I see the collaboration has evolved with researchers, with clinicians, with the scientific community. But of course, and Andreas mentioned that, everything starts with a story. And I actually was diagnosed in 2001. I was traveling 800 kilometers a week to Andreas Center to join a phase 2 clinical study with STI-571 and pegylated interferon. And if you think about how do patients make their decisions, you can see my decision tree here, because I just looked for all the literature from the different ASH publications and abstracts and so on and tried to calculate my odds. Don't take the percentages as for granted, because this was 2001, we knew hardly anything, but it looks much better to be dead by just about 20%, by just be dead about 9% in comparison to 22 for the standard treatment for my age group at that time. So I made my choices and actually joined the clinical study and got to know Andreas from various different perspectives. We became partners over the years to really make a difference, because we were driven actually to make a difference for CML patients and beyond. And very similarly, through the advent of STI-571, which became imatinib later on, actually there was a lot of grassroots patient advocacy. Giora will tell his story later on as well, but there were like online platforms and so on at that time emerging, where we tried to find out what's happening in research here. So I got to know a lot of CML stuff from a lady in Singapore, was reviewing CML publications in the US and then putting that on a Yahoo forum that we patients understand. That's why I founded Leukemia Online at that time, to translate that into Germany. But when it really started for our community was actually 2003, you can see it on the bottom left. When Novartis brought us together in Diessenhofen in Switzerland in 2003, actually just these kind of grassroots activists like ours, to get best practice sharing going between us, to understand how we build organizations, how we support patients. And then the photo that Andreas was also using on the bottom right was actually the initiating meeting when Giora, Jana, myself, and David Reiner actually met in my home in Munich to build CML Advocates as a website, because we thought we cannot just have a yearly meeting, we need to work more together. And that's how CML Advocates actually emerged. You can also see John Goldman was part of our journey from the beginning. He was at very early New Horizons meetings and so on. And over the years, the whole network, the global network, has grown to 128 organizations in 93 countries. And you can see the map on the top right. All the green countries have patient organizations on CML. So it's an impressive network, and it's one of the largest single disease rare cancer networks worldwide, which of course is thanks to people like Giora, like Pat, like many others, that were really driving change and trying to get everyone working together. But of course we were not alone. I mean, this is an evolution of patient advocacy over the past 30 years. We didn't invent that in CML. The HIV community was starting that in the early 1990s, because they were dissatisfied with the way they were actually involved and being taken care of. So they induced change, and over the years we've started to work with EMA, with FDA, with all different institutions. We were setting up the European Patients Academy, the patient-focused medicine development, and other initiatives to really drive patient engagement and to develop tools and methodologies that researchers like you know how to work with us, and that we as patient advocates actually know how to work with you. And then we actually developed that, and this sounds like a lot of theory, but that's a roadmap, what kind of input patients can give across the development of clinical research. And I can't go through all the different sections, but we've done a lot in CML over the years. We've discussed with the companies about food effects of their drugs. We've discussed about access issues. We've discussed about falsified medicines. We discussed about the necessity of bone marrow biopsies in pediatric studies on bosutinib. We've discussed almost every kind of thing over those years and tried to bring in our perspective into trial steering committees, data safety monitoring committees, investigator meetings, and so on. And sometimes we were, of course, quite comfortable because we were impatient patients. We couldn't see change quick enough, and I apologize for that, but that's the way we are, especially when in our groups we see people passing away. It's really hard sometimes to be patient and say, well, we can do that next year. Over the years, we've also started to work with all the different institutions. Because CML, we had the privilege of survival. If you look at other cancers, patients are dying very quickly, and so do our advocates. Those that we have trained over years are suddenly no longer there, like in melanoma. In CML, we had the privilege of still being here, like Geora and myself. So very often, CML has been also a model for patient advocacy, working between all the different stakeholders. And I can't go through all the different institutions here, but we've been involved with the RTC on the CML24 module. We've been involved in ISPOR about health technology assessment. We've been deeply involved in EHA. I'm going to speak about that, and different committees of the EMA over the years. And CML has always been a privilege because we learned a lot. I mean, look at how we chronified this cancer. We hope this is a role model for many other cancers too. So that's why CML is sometimes like a pilot. EHA has been a difficult case, but a very successful one, because in 2005 their board decided that patients shouldn't be involved in their conference. You can see actually the extract from their board protocol at that time, which is in their annual public book. But over the years, in 2010, we got 45 minutes on the scientific meeting and the whole EHA board in the front row, because they were not sure it was a good idea to give us a session where we defined the topic. It became very successful over the years. We have a full track. We have a fellowship program for EHA. We have speakers at the education session. And actually, since September this year, for the first time, no, since July this year, for the first time, we also have an observer on the scientific program committee, which for EHA is quite a hard nut to crack, because we are there, because usually these are really scientists and they don't want to let anyone in there. But we are there, and we are very proud of the collaboration with EHA too. Of course, access to medical conferences has been an issue. You can see the arrow on the bottom left side, that's the press pass. So Geora and I had to enter the ASH meeting for years as media delegates with a press pass, because there was no way for patient advocates to go there. We've been protesting against that for years. You can see on the top right, that was a campaign we ran on Twitter in 2020, because there was just no movement with ASH to actually get into the conference. And actually that campaign made them rethink, and now since 2021, there's an access program for patient advocates to ASH. But sometimes we need to do these things, and even if people think that's too much, doing that over Twitter and being so impatient patients, sometimes that's the way to move the needle. And you can see the photo in the middle, that was actually at ESMO 2014, where for the first time, oncologists in the patient community protested against not being able to access, like the exhibition, satellite symposia, and so on. And since then, the policy of ESMO has changed too. So I don't want to go into, Andreas presented the data that we've generated. We have been working very closely with the community. And just to say the adherence survey and the TFR survey we have done would just be our accomplishment. It was also because people like Verena Hoffmann, like Andreas Hochhaus, like Fabio Efficace and others supported us deeply in developing these projects, in sending out questionnaires through the clinics and study groups and so on. And I mean, the data is published if you're interested about the adherence survey as well as on the TFR survey. But we've also had the chance to present the data at EHA, at iCMLf ASH 2018, at ASH 2013. So it's been a privilege actually to bring our concerns, our topics, our opinions to the patient community. So our newest thing is actually to focus on quality of life research, because we're of course absolutely grateful about TFR, but think about those patients that can't go into TFR, will not have a cure. They need to take TKI or STAMP inhibitors for the rest of their life. So what's their quality of life? We know a bit about toxicity, we know a bit about events, but we don't really know what kind of impact it has on everyday life of patients. And that's why we just submitted 3 research proposals to Harmony. One on toxicity over time, like time on transients, cumulative effects, and quality of life. One about prevalence on clinical relevance problems and symptoms across all the different TKI therapies. And one about correlation of demographic disease and therapy factor with the toxicity tolerability of the TKIs. So we have generated these proposals together with input from, for example, Fabio, and we've submitted them to Harmony, and we're now in search of data that we can do that kind of big data analytics in the Harmony project. And to get more data about quality of life, we have also developed an app now, which we launched in July. You can see it's very visual, but in the end, it's the EORTC QQ30 plus CML24 behind that. So we're going to collect valid quality of life data, even though it's, of course, real world and not assessed in a clinical setting. It gives us some indications on the frequency, incidence of quality of life issues and symptoms and side effects. And that will actually be very interesting data. And we have a couple of incentives for patients to use that app because they can benchmark their own experience against the whole community. Then the Community Advisory Board. This is something we've built years ago. We have representatives highly trained from all the different world regions. And we have actually convened a meeting of the first academic Community Advisory Board in 2020 because we said, if TFR is not the answer for everyone, if the current approaches of TKI and STEMP are not the answers, what other approaches are there? What are the barriers to research, and how can we as a community help that this research happens? So we convened a meeting with all the different approaches on CAR-T, CRISPR, genetics, stem cell research to better understand, not the science, we're not scientists, but to understand where are the barriers that this research happens. And we're working currently on the follow-up of that meeting. And let me close with that. Research is important and clinical excellence is fantastic, but only treatment that gets into patients can work. And that's our main worry, because we know Germany and France and Spain and the US are very exceptional countries. Most of the countries don't have these kind of privileges. And we need to remember these curves. The green one is currently where we are with current TKIs in terms of overall survival. But if we can't get the treatments that are at the moment on the market, we're back to the curves on the bottom, to the red ones. And that's why access is so important. It's a global responsibility, and we need to work together. And this is why the iCMLf and the global community in working between low, middle, and high-income countries is so important because we can tackle these things together. And from that perspective, I thank you a lot for the collaboration over the past 20 years. I'm looking forward to the next 20 years of partnership. And of course, thank you to all of you and the patient advocates that are in our network. And with that, thank you so much. And I'm handing over to Giora now.